and I will be sharing the recording and the slides with all registered participants. And before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have a PhD in experimental neuroscience and did my postdoc in neurogenetics. And before joining Protocols.io about 2 years ago to promote the practice of open science and particularly open methods, I was an editor in the open access journal PLOS Biology for 9 years. So the focus of today's presentation, it's about the incentives for sharing research methods in Protocols.io or in any other outlet or repository. So some general housekeeping information before we delve into the content of the presentation. As I mentioned before, the presentation is being recorded and will be shared with all registered participants. We will also have time at the end for questions, which you should feel free to type at any moment in the Q&A or in the chat windows of Zoom. And if I spot those questions, I might stop to answer them. But if I don't, we will get to them at the end of my presentation. And finally, this is not a basic training about Protocols.io. The focus of this presentation is about the mechanisms for getting credit for method development. You can check the 3 websites at the bottom of this slide for more information about upcoming basic and advanced webinars about Protocols.io. You can also check our list of pre-recorded tutorials, and the last link here, it's a link in which you can request a one-to-one demo to discuss any question you might have about the platform with one of our specialists. So now with the housekeeping out of the way, we can start with today's agenda, which you should be able to see on the screen now. So we will talk a little bit about the history of reporting methods and of method development and optimization not getting the recognition as worthy of a standalone publication and not getting the credit that it deserves. But that started to change about 20 years ago as methods started being recognized as an important modular output of research. We will also cover the different ways of sharing and getting credit in Protocols.io. So for the first part, sorry, I'm getting a note that the slide is not fully visible. Is that correct? Can you please type in the chat whether you can or cannot see the full slide? Okay, so I think that most of the people can see it. The person who is having trouble, it's probably on their end. So as I was saying about the first part of the presentation. So let's go a little bit back in history. So the journal Nature Methods was actually started only in 2004. And the excerpt that you see at the bottom of the screen now is from the inaugural editorial, in which the founding editor said that their goal was to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods. Because major methodological developments take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. By contrast, the method sections of specialized journals, although extremely useful for the targeted peer groups, do not grant technical information the wide exposure conducive to interdisciplinary exchanges. And we will touch on this a little more later on. But behind the scenes, what we learned from the founding editor-in-chief of Nature Methods, Veronique Kiermer, who later became the chief scientific officer at the Public Library of Science, is that even in the Nature publishing group, there was a lot of skepticism about launching this method-centered journal, because they said that Nature published research and not methods, and nobody was going to read just methods, and that these could dilute their brand, and that it will be impossible to fill a journal's pages with just methods, and so on. However, as we all know, Nature Methods has been a huge success, but it is interesting to think about the skepticism of giving methods independent credit as recently as 2004. But if now we look more recently, within the last 10 years, there are a lot of journals now focusing on and publishing protocols and methods. Some examples are shown in this slide, and I don't think that the list is exhaustive. Big publishers like Springer Nature keep expanding their portfolio of methods-centered journals, like Nature Protocols, that launched 2 years after Nature Methods. And now they recently acquired Protocols.io. Another big publisher, Elsevier, launched Star Protocols and Methods X. And there are some other independent initiatives like Jove, Bioprotocols, and some others. It seems, therefore, that we are now in a place where journals, funders, and many researchers have started to realize it is not just code and data that we should be sharing. And in that sense, you might recall that it was in the late 90s when we started to move away from please contact authors for code and data to use specialized repository for this code and data, like GitHub, Dryad, Figshare, the Open Science Framework, and others. And although methods have been playing catch up, sharing them is becoming the norm. And you have now more choices on where and how to communicate your methods. But that's enough about the changes that we have seen in recent times. I will go on now to talk about public sharing and getting credit for reproducible and discoverable protocols. And specifically about protocols.io, we will go through first how most people share their methods in the platform, which is actually independently of papers. Then we will talk about the partnership that protocols.io has with PLOS ONE and other journals like BMC Methods to get your peer-reviewed protocols, to get your protocols peer-reviewed and published as a formal indexed peer-reviewed manuscript, as well as the many partnerships and connections that we have with many other journals which aim to make your papers more rigorous and reproducible. So, when we see how scientists communicate their work and their discoveries to their colleagues and to the world more broadly, we have started to see a more modular approach to science communication. So at the center of this cartoon, we have the most recognized research output, which is the peer-reviewed publication, the paper. This is the bread and butter, the currency that you put on your CVs and that funders and other employers will be looking at when evaluating your productivity. But we now appreciate more the value of other independent but interrelated modules of research output, like code and data, and we have created specific repository for these, like GitHub, Open Science Framework, Sonoro, Dryad, as we mentioned before. Methods are another module of research output, and in fact, methods are really the linchpin to reuse, and the ongoing value of all the other items here hinges on having the methods. Because I venture to claim it is really difficult, if not impossible, to understand the meaning of data and any interpretation of the data if we do not understand the details of how these results were acquired, and that is the methods. And this is where protocols.io comes in, because protocols.io is an online open access repository and a platform for authors to create, share, and publish dynamic, interactive, versionable, and detailed protocols before, during, and after publication of a research article. And I would need to clarify here that what we understand as publication of a protocol in protocols.io is similar to preprinting an article in bioRxiv, for example. We're a repository for methods, not a peer-reviewed journal. For journals, publication is different, because for journals, publication is the result of the peer review process. However, as we will discuss later on, protocols deposited in protocols.io are citable and can be part of a peer-reviewed publication, or even they can be peer-reviewed as a stand-alone methodological articles. If you are not familiar with protocols.io at all, please take a look at the URL at the bottom of this slide. And this will take you to the welcome page, which is a great place to start familiarizing yourself with the platform. Now, as I said before, one of the features of protocols.io is its open access repository, which now hosts over 16,000 public protocols, which are all published under a CC BY license, making them completely open access and free to read, use, and reuse. In this open access platform, it is also free to create an account and to publish an unlimited number of protocols in the open access repository. However, there are also over 57,000 private protocols, which have been created by users who are developing, optimizing, and perhaps just sharing their protocols with their immediate colleagues. And this is the business model of protocols.io. As we charge institutions for these private, collaborative workspaces, and many universities, funders, and other institutions have such premium licenses. The free accounts have only a limited number of private files. So if you make your protocols and publish them right away, the free account can work for everyone. But we charge users to take advantage of unlimited private space. And something that I want to point out is that last year alone, more than 2 million people came to the repository to read the public protocols. And most of these protocols are not linked to any specific peer-reviewed article. They are simply sitting in protocols.io. And we will talk about people's motivations to share independently of a paper. But what I want to point out is that despite of this sharing being independent of a peer-reviewed publication, there is a lot of traffic to the protocols. About 60% of all traffic to the public protocols in protocols.io comes directly from Google searches, which means that people are organically finding these protocols. And geographically speaking, when we look at our own analytics, we see that only about 30% of the traffic to our protocols comes from the USA, and the rest is from all over the world, which means that there is a really global reach once you publish the protocols in the platform. And when you come to protocols.io, you can also search directly for specific keywords that might be useful in your research. And these protocols can be run directly from the computer or tablet to create a run record of your experiment. And you can also create your own forks or editable copies of someone else's published protocol, which you can tweak for the equipment you have in your lab or for the different cell type in your experiment and so on. And this might save you a lot of time and energy because you will have all the comprehensive details of the approach right there straight away. Protocols.io also have some open communities, and these are set up as workspaces. So if you use protocols.io, you will very likely have your own private workspace. But some workspaces have been created by their owners as open for all to join. So you can look not only for protocols, but also for workspaces that represent communities that might be relevant to your research. And you can join those if you want to have a faster view of what people are working on in that space and the ability to interact and engage with other researchers who are also members of those groups. And before we continue, let me show you how the protocols created and published in protocols.io are live, dynamic, and interactive, yet persistent documents that go far beyond what a traditional static PDF offers. So I'm going to open one of these protocols, which you can now see on the screen. Because this protocol has been published, it has received a DOI, which makes it permanent and citable. The protocol itself is written in a recipe-like, detailed step-by-step format. It can be enriched or supplemented with images, pictures, and even videos that you can play. Different sections of the protocol can be coded in different colors, creating a table of content that I can navigate. The protocols are interactive because they accept comments. So any reader can come and post a question or a comment, and the authors will be notified, and they can come again to the platform to respond to that comment. The protocols are versionable, and I can navigate to different versions of the protocol, and I can even compare two versions of the protocol to see what is different among them. Any public protocol can be copied or forked, so I can optimize it according to my own needs. And as I mentioned before, the protocol can be run directly from the computer or tablet to create an experimental record. As I make progress in my protocol, I can mark each step as done. If I note something unusual in this run of my experiment, I can add a comment, and all that will be saved as an independent file with a timestamp. So I can keep record of my experimental runs. But let me go back to my presentation. Now, let's change gears a little bit and talk about the rewards associated with publishing detailed research protocols. Not necessarily in order of importance, but a first reward for making your methods public is that, going back to the concept of modular communication of research outputs, by using specialized repositories for publishing your methods, you are increasing their discoverability and potential reuse, which should lead to increased credit and recognition. And let me use an example taken here from Twitter, now called X. So you can see here a tweet from a researcher who was looking for a protocol for RNA extraction from primary cortical neurons in culture. Someone answered this tweet and recommended a protocol that is in protocols.io. And this protocol was actually part of a paper that was published in the journal Giga Science. But the paper was about a fish parasite. So the chances of researchers working on primary cortical neurons finding a paper on a fish parasite as a means of finding a method that will work for them seem really slim. But because the protocol was published independently in a specialized methods repository, it made the protocol more discoverable and increased the chances of people reusing it. And once the protocol is published, the document in the platform has a tab that is called metrics that follows in real time all traffic and use of this protocol, including number of views, bookmarks, export, copies, comments, and citation. So you have a sense of the impact of the protocol in the research community. And an obvious second reward for publishing your methods is the increase of reproducibility, not only in the field, but also internally in the work that you do in your own research group. And if you are not familiar with this, let me introduce to you the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project, which was a $1.5 million initiative coordinated by the Center for Open Science and by Science Exchange with the goal of trying to independently replicate almost 200 experiments from about 50 high-profile papers on cancer biology. What the Reproducibility Project researchers discovered very soon after the project began is that it is actually very difficult to replicate previously published work. And there are several reasons why this is the case, but one of them is that the original researchers, those that published those almost 200 papers, didn't document in these articles with enough detail what they did and how they did it. So what you see on the screen is the Center for Open Science website that summarizes some of the results of the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project. And as you can see, from the 193 experiments that they tried to replicate from 53 articles, 0% of the protocols, 0% were completely described, which made it impossible to reproduce them without contacting the original authors. But equally striking, when researchers from the Reproducibility Project contacted the original authors, they also discovered that these did not always could tell how exactly their own experiments had been done. Therefore, the problem of lack of reproducibility goes beyond the lack of adequate reporting in published articles, but also highlight deficiencies in the way researchers keep record of their own experimental protocols for housekeeping. And that brings me to a third reason to make your protocols public, which is to guarantee preservations. As we all know, a large fraction of our lab personnel at any given time is floating. Students graduate and leave, postdoctoral researchers become faculty elsewhere, and so on. Publishing the protocols makes them a persistent, citable object that will be permanently stored in your workspace as well as in the open access repository. And I should mention that all private and public content in protocols.io is mirrored and backed up in clocks, the Internet Archive, and GitHub. And the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative has a code escrow of the platform. And modular sharing also increases the chances of establishing collaborations because we have seen cases where researchers report that making their protocols public leads to an increase in the number of collaboration. And one important thing to note is that since protocols.io was launched in 2014, and now with these more than 16,000 public protocols, we have never seen a case of a publisher saying that because you share your methods in protocols.io, you cannot publish your research or method paper in their journals. As we discussed briefly before, publishers do not consider publishing in protocols.io prior publication. So just like sharing your preprints in bioarchives, sharing in protocols.io is like preprinting methods. And so we have never seen a case of that hurting authors. So we encourage people to share publicly whenever their protocols are ready. So from the publishing perspective, sharing a protocol in protocols.io should give your method visibility, let you engage with the people who are using the method, make it a central place where you can iterate and share corrections and optimizations easily, and guide everyone naturally to those new versions. And it does not preclude further recognition by publishing this protocol later as part of a peer-reviewed publication. And that takes me to the fact that by publishing your protocols, you should also be simplifying your work down the road when the time of submitting a manuscript comes. Let me use another example here from Twitter. So we have Professor Kipnis at the Washington University in St. Louis, the United States, tweeting and saying, what if labs publish each of their unique methods or protocols, and in future papers, instead of rewriting the protocols, we just cite them? We waste so much time on methods by saying the same thing differently. And that is exactly what protocols.io is about. You can publish your protocol in the open access repository, obtain a citable DOI, and cite this protocol in your paper and papers, so you never have to write method sections again. And this is what the authors of this PLOS Biology paper did. They created, deposited, and published their protocols in protocols.io, obtaining a citable DOI, which they included in the materials and method sections, replacing most of the writing. Now, the reader, by following the link, has access to the detailed step-by-step protocol in protocols.io. And a really nice thing about how protocols.io works is that, as I mentioned before, the protocols are versionable. So if the authors have updated their protocol since the time of publication, the reader will be notified and can choose to read the protocol as it was published together with the paper, which is what you see now on the screen, or by following the view the newer version link, have access to the most updated version of that protocol. And that brings me to the fact that because there is a push for reproducibility and transparency, there are now over 500 journals, some open access, some subscription journals, that encourage authors in their submission guidelines to include in their manuscript a link to the detailed protocols in protocols.io. And this also applies to many funders, now encouraging or requiring detailed method sharing. And remember that I said that we have never had an issue with authors not being able to publish a paper for publishing a protocol first. In fact, not only do journals not see a conflict with publishing your protocols early in protocols.io, they often actively encourage the use of the platform. And a sixth point will be that by managing, preserving, and storing your protocols in protocols.io, you will be complying with mandates by funding agencies and universities regarding managing and sharing methods and data. In the United States, for example, the NIH data management and sharing policy requires all grant applicants to include a data management and sharing statement in the applications. And the NIH's rigor and reproducibility guidelines explicitly highlight the need for grant applicants to describe details in their applications, which should be considered by reviewers. And we have to keep in mind that methods are an integral part of data. So if you're required to share data, you should be sharing the methods to acquiring those data as well. And before we move to the next section, I would like to show you how easy it is to publish a protocol in protocols.io. So I'm going to be opening my account in protocols.io. And in this folder, I have two protocols. And it is very easy for me to publish any of these protocols by just going to the publish function. It will take me to a 6-step workflow just to complete some metadata and make my protocol public. Before the protocol becomes public, it goes through a light screen by our team. And the process shouldn't take you longer than 10 minutes, and it usually takes us between 1 and 2 days to screen for protocols submitted for publication. In addition to publishing your protocol, you also have the option to reserve a DOI, which means that the protocol will be fixed in time, will receive a digital object identifier that you can share with a journal if you are submitting a manuscript that includes this protocol, but the protocol will not be made public. So either you can publish, reserve a DOI, or post a draft, which means that you make the protocol public, but a DOI is not assigned to it. Now, I would like to move now to the third point in the agenda, which is a very specific partnership that we have established with PLOS ONE, and now we're extending with other journals, which fits this narrative of method renaissance. Because the idea is to bring more credit and recognition to method development. And this partnership is that within PLOS ONE, there is a new article type called Lab Protocol. And this collaboration is about turning your protocol in protocols.io into a peer-reviewed publication. Now, just to clarify, if you're interested into getting your protocols peer-reviewed and published as a protocol article, you do not have to publish it with PLOS ONE. There are other several journals that are specialized in publishing methods, techniques, and protocols. You know your field and you know your audience. And you know the appropriate journals. But PLOS ONE is a pretty broad, welcoming journal. And one of the reasons we're excited about this partnership is that the way the way that PLOS ONE has defined the scope is that they are not expecting new experimental results. They are welcoming to new protocols that might be extensions of something that has already been reported. So the idea is that if you published already a method or someone else did, but your work has been to troubleshoot or optimize it for new conditions, for example, that this work of optimization and tweaking can be recognized. So with this collaboration, both PLOS ONE and protocols.io aim to grant credit not only to the development of a whole brand new method, but also to the hard work put into optimizing and troubleshooting a protocol to make it work more efficiently or in a new condition. So the bar has been set in a way that we want to recognize a good and useful protocol. There should be, of course, some effort behind it, but the idea is to capture the constant method development that very often goes unacknowledged and is usually summarized in 1 or 2 sentences in the materials and method sections of manuscripts. And the integration between PLOS ONE and protocols.io means that the protocol is now front and center of the paper. So what you see on the screen is an example of one of these lab protocol articles. And there is a link in the protocol that takes you to the article and the other way around. And the protocol in protocols.io receives additional badges saying that this protocol has been peer-reviewed and published as a standalone paper in the journal PLOS ONE. Now, let me again show you my file manager. Open one of these protocols. And once you have your protocol ready to be submitted to a journal, there is a link here that says peer-reviewed options. And you can send it to PLOS ONE, which is the partnership that I just explained. But we also recently established partnerships with Nature Protocols and BMC methods. So you can send this protocol to peer-reviewed as a methodological article to any of these 3 journals through the platform. And now moving to the last part of my presentation, which is about the partnerships that we have with other publishers. I would like to start by saying that although we're all very familiar with supplementary files and documents in papers, there has been a strong push for a number of years now to try to move away from supplements by using repositories instead. And what you see on the screen is a good article about this topic in the magazine The Scientist. And the idea of moving away from supplements and using repositories is that the repositories are searchable. Many of them are machine readable, and you can get independent credit for data, code, and methods. And these are just a few examples of papers that are published and the journals promoting deposition of detailed protocols in protocols.io. And this is the kind of modular publishing that we have started seeing more and more, where the paper is the centerpiece. It is the story, but you have the data in NCBI, Open Science Framework, or other appropriate repository. The code is in GitHub or CodeOcean, for example, and now we're starting to see more and more of the methods also going to a repository like protocols.io. So we're seeing some trend in scholarly publishing, moving away from vague method sections to more rigorous, more reproducible method reporting. And as I mentioned before, a published protocol in protocols.io with an assigned DOI is a citable object that can be referenced to in a paper, giving credit to the author's methodological work. And the reference will also be linked to the protocol in protocols.io, so the reader will have access to the interactive, detailed, step-by-step protocol, even if the paper was published behind a paywall, because all our public content is open access. And I want to highlight that by doing a good job at reporting your methods, that should increase the impact of the associated papers, as these data show. So what we see here is a study published in PLOS ONE that shows in the pink data that as the career of scientists progress, they value the method section of papers more and more, because they understand that methods are the linchpin to properly interpret the data and to reproduce the experiments. So to summarize, you can read in this slide some of the rewards and benefits of openly sharing your protocols and linking these protocols to your research articles. And with that, I will happy to take some questions, which some of you have already written in the chat and the Q&A. So, Dr. Carlos Goller writes whether students have to log in to make comments, and to be able to make comments on public protocols, you need to create an account. Yes. And the reason for that is that if the authors respond to that question or comment, you need to be notified. So you need to create an account to have an email address in which any response to that comment will be sent to the commenter. Another question says, can I prepare a version 2 of a published protocol in the private space before making it public? So any new protocol, either from the scratch or a new version or a new fork of a public protocol, is by default private. So everything that you start creating is private, and you have to take a proactive action to make it public. So the answer is yes. Any new version or fork of a public protocol is private by default, and you have to take an action to make it public. So we have a question from Dr. Linares Perdomo, who says, how do I know that the experimental methods published on protocols.io are peer-reviewed? What can we do if these methods data published in protocols.io are not reproducible? So when you search for a protocol in the platform, let me go to the welcome page. So what you see on the screen now is the welcome page. So I can search for any protocol. Let's say so if I open a protocol, if the protocol has been peer-reviewed, there will have additional labels here that says that this protocol has been peer-reviewed and published in PLOS ONE. If the protocol has not been peer-reviewed, you will not see these flags here. However, the protocols have a button that says works for me. So if people use this protocol and it has worked for them, they can click this and the count will go up to 3. When you are searching for protocols, you can sort those protocols based on works for me as well. If you decide to use one of the protocols in the platform and it doesn't work for you, we recommend that you write a comment and let the authors know where you are struggling. If I go to any of these protocols, the comments that have been posted are all public. So as a user, you can actually read the comments. So if users are struggling with a protocol, future users can read the conversation between the users and the authors. So somebody asked, how do I know my novel method won't get scooped if my protocol is posted? Everything that we published is open access. So we encourage people to share, and we encourage users to cite the DOI associated with that protocol. If you are concerned with being scooped, our recommendation is that you post at the same time that you are submitting your paper to a journal. But posting in protocols.io is like posting in bioarchives. You are making your data public with a open access license, and anyone can use your protocol as long as they cite the source, in this case, your EOI. Uh, Another comment says that many people don't use citations on the method sections. Well, we think that they should. If you are describing a method that is inspired in another paper, you should be citing that paper or method. But also, as an author, if you have deposited your methods in protocols.io and you have received DOIs, instead of rewriting the method, you can actually point the reader to the detailed protocols in protocols.io by writing the DOIs in the method section. And another person asked, what does protocols.io do to ensure transparency of citation? And reader reminder of citation is displayed for the reader to prevent the failure to cite. So when people are writing their protocols, there is a metadata that tells how people should cite the protocol. So this is the protocol. These are the steps. There is a tab that calls metadata, and there is an instruction on how the protocol should be cited. If this protocol is also part of a publication, there is a second window that says manuscript citation that clearly states, please remember to cite the following publication along with this protocol. So we are encouraging readers to cite not only the protocol, but also the paper in which this protocol was used for the first time. If I haven't responded correctly to any of your questions, please do let me know. There are another few questions in the chat. Let me see. Ari is asking whether the free account has a limited number of public protocols. No, the free accounts have a limited number of private protocols of 2 at a time, but as long as you keep publishing them, you can publish as many protocols as you want. There is no limitation in the number of publications you can do from the free accounts. What is the difference between copying and forking? When you make a copy of an existing protocol, the new copy is independent. It won't be linked to the original protocol. And copying is reserved for the authors of the original protocol. In forking, the new fork will be historically linked to the original one. And forking, anyone can fork a public protocol, the original authors, but also any other reader. And once you fork a protocol, let me show you on the screen. For example, in this case, this protocol has been forked from a different protocol. So the platform clearly labels when a protocol has been forked, and this new fork has been published. Anyone can fork, but only the original authors can make a copy. So another question is, can protocols be shared without being published? You can share privately with collaborators if you don't want to publish your protocol. So again, if I go to my account, I can take any private protocol. All these are private protocols. I can select share, and I can get a shareable link that I can send via email or via Slack to any close collaborator. And the sharing will be only between my collaborator and I without me making the protocol public. The question is, do journals like Nature Methods consider a protocol in protocols.io acceptable for submission for peer review? Yes, they do, but you have to read the guidelines and the scope of the journal to make sure that your protocol fits within the scope. But as I showed you before, when you have a protocol, and in this case, this is a private protocol, you will have a link here to the journals that you can submit directly from the platform. Nature Methods is not within the list, but that doesn't mean that you cannot take your protocol and submit it to Nature Methods with a link to the DOI in the platform. Another question, when you send a protocol to one of those three journals like PLOS ONE, is the protocol publishable standalone without a description of other work? Yes. The protocol is published as a standalone publication. And the only results that are expected are those that are needed to validate the protocol. So it is a methodological paper. It is not part of a big story. It is a methodological paper that describes the methods, and the results are those needed to validate the method. So how many protocols with a collaborative journal, such as PLOS, can become peer-reviewed per research article? So let's say that you have a research article with 5 protocols, and you want to have those 5 protocols independently peer-reviewed as protocol papers. You can submit all of them as long as they are novel enough. Again, you have to read the guidelines and the scope of the journals. So for example, for the lab protocol uh, papers, they do not publish standard protocols. So you cannot submit for peer review just how to load a gel with a DNA sample, for example. It has to be a protocol that the editors will consider is somehow innovative, or that there is some work behind the optimization of the protocol. So what happens after selecting on the journal for peer review? It will take you to the web page of the journal where it will explain what they expect from that protocol. So for example, the protocols in the platform, they don't have an introduction. They have an abstract, but not an introduction because it's not an article. Probably for most of the journals, you will have to include an introduction. So if you select any of the journals, it will take you to the guidelines of what is expected for a protocol article in that journal. I think that I have gone through all of the questions that have been typed. Are there any other questions? So Daniela Miller asks, can you submit a protocol for peer review with PLOS ONE, for example, if the protocol has already been published on protocols.io? Yes, if the protocol has been published in protocols.io, but it hasn't been peer reviewed anywhere else, you can submit that protocol to be peer reviewed in PLOS ONE. And you can do it simultaneously, or you can do it, you can publish in PLOS ONE in protocols.io first, and then submit to PLOS ONE. But at least in the case of PLOS ONE, before they commit to publishing the paper, at the moment of acceptance, they have to make sure that your protocol is in protocols.io. But you can publish it in the platform first. So we have 3 minutes left. Any other questions so far? Okay, can you please clarify the reserved DOI option again? Yes. So when you have a protocol, and what we're seeing on the screen is one of my private protocols, I can publish it. Publishing will fix it in time. You cannot, once you publish a protocol, you cannot edit it anymore. It will make it public, and it will assign to it a DOI, making it citable as well as permanent. If you reserve a DOI, you will be freezing the protocol in time. You cannot edit it anymore. But you will not be making the protocol public. However, it will receive a DOI, so you can share that DOI with the journal to which you are submitting your paper, in which this protocol is part of. Once you decide to make the protocol public, the DOI will be the same as the one that you reserved. So you will be obtaining a DOI, but it will not be made public, and therefore it will not be sent to Crossref. Another question: if I cite a protocol if I cite a protocol.io in the methods of a paper, is that considered peer-reviewed once the paper is accepted? It is not. So you have to get your protocol peer-reviewed as a protocol paper for it to be considered peer-reviewed. However, you can include in the protocol a mention to that protocol in the paper. So it is not a peer-reviewed protocol, but the protocol has been used in a paper, which are two different things. Because for peer-reviewed protocols, we want to make sure that the reviewers go to the platform and they read the paper, they read the method in the platform. So let me show you an example. So in this example, this paper, this protocol hasn't been peer-reviewed because it hasn't been peer-reviewed as a protocol article, but has been used in this Nature Communications paper. So those are two different things. If you want us to add a peer-reviewed label here, you have to peer-review your protocol as a standalone publication. Well, we are now off time. I hope that the presentation was useful and I clarified all your questions. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out at Gabriel at protocols.io, and I will be happy to answer them offline. Thank you so much for your attendance and for all your questions.